Hi, welcome back to the Photoshop training channel. I'm Jesus Ramirez. Today I have a very different kind of tutorial for you. This is going to be the first of my PTC Edits Your Photos series. So that's right, you can now submit photos to me and I can work on them and make tutorials out of them. Obviously, I can't work on everybody's photo, but I'll try to do my best and include multiple photos per video. In this video, we're just going to work with one. Patrick Schaefer, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, submitted this photo of Iron Man, and I thought it was a super cool composite, and he left me this message basically telling me that he needed help with compositing and color matching. And instead of just replying to his email and maybe giving him a few suggestions, I thought it would be a good idea to record the whole process and just share it with everybody as a tutorial. So this is going to be the first episode of me editing your photos, or PTC editing your photos. So I'm very excited to see what you guys are going to submit. I've actually made a page on my website that gives you instructions on how to submit files to me. Basically, just make sure that you have the rights, photos that you take, and you can submit composites, maybe just one photo and you need help with color grading or something like that. It doesn't matter what the project is, just submit it over to me. I'll look over the images, and if I find something that I think will be beneficial to a lot of people, then I'll make a video out of it. So the link to my website is down below in the description. That will take you to the page where you can submit photos so that I could do more episodes on PTC Edits Your Photos. So why don't we jump right into this composite? This is the image here. There's a link below in the description to this PSD if you want to follow along. But anyway, let me show you what it contains. And also, here's a quick trick for you. If you click on the eye icon and drag down, you'll disable all the layers. And we'll start with the layer in the bottom, which is the background layer. And above that, we have a curves adjustment layer that is creating some contrast. This really cool photo of Iron Man. I'll disable the layer mask by holding Shift and clicking on the layer mask thumbnail to see the original image. Pretty cool. And we have two adjustment layers that apply this color effect. And we have this layer that applies a rim light. And actually, this is a really good composite for a video like this one, because I really think that Patrick did a good job. He was just missing a few things that just with a little help could really help the composite be much better. So that's what I hope to show in this video. And by the way, everything in this video is subjective. So there might be something that you like that Patrick did and maybe not like what I do, and that's okay. It's just my opinion on what I would do with the images that were provided. So let's get right to it and see how we can improve this composite. Well, why don't we take it with one layer at a time? So let's start with the background layer. What I'll do first is convert it into a smart object to work non-destructively. A smart object is a container that allows you to apply non-destructive adjustments, distortions, filters, and transformations to one or more layers. And what I'm going to do is make sure that I name everything. And let me show you why it's important to name your layers. So I'm going to call this layer background, and I'll enable the other layers again. And if you have the move tool selected and you right click on the canvas, notice how you get a list of all the layers that are below the area that I clicked on. So if I wanted to select a layer and I click on layer number 1, I probably wouldn't know what that layer is, right? Because I might not remember. So if I click on layer number 1, it selects it here in the layers panel, and that is the Iron Man layer. So I should call it Iron Man. That way I know for sure what this layer contains. So next time that I click on that area, notice that Iron Man is listed there, including the background layer. So I can select the background layer and it selects it from the layers panel. So that is one reason why you should name your layers. Another reason is to make it easier for you when you're looking at the layers from the layers panel, or if you are going to be sharing the file with somebody, it just makes it easier for them to edit. But anyway, with this background layer, I'm going to remove some of the perspective distortions in the background just to make it a better image. So I'm going to go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter. This is the new Camera Raw filter, by the way. If you're working in an older version of Photoshop, no worries. All the tools are still there. They're just found in different areas. So with the Geometry tab, what I'm going to do is click on the A icon to do an automatic upright, just to see if this fixes all the perspective issues. And it does a really good job, actually. This looks like it's straight. This post looks like it's straight. Everything looks straight in my image. The line down here is not so straight, but I think that's okay. If I wanted to, I could probably do it manually by clicking on this icon and then just clicking and dragging on a vertical edge. And I'll click and drag on a horizontal edge like so, and that straightens the image. In this case, the needle is something important in the scene, so I could draw another line through the needle. That way it straightens the needle. And then maybe I can do one through the apartment building here. And that looks pretty good. It's basically the same thing I had with the automatic upright, but in this case, I did it manually. So I'm gonna press OK, and Photoshop applies that change to the image. Also, in this case, I don't think that we have the perspective right. If I enable this image here of Iron Man, I could tell that he's not in perspective, and it's gonna be really hard to get this into perspective because both photos have vastly different perspectives. So for example, you can see the sky here in the background and the ground here. Where they meet is probably right here, somewhere down here. And if you follow the parallel converging lines in this building, you'll note that they lead to an area right about here. And with Iron Man, that's not the case. If I enable the background, you can see the converging lines here, and they probably meet somewhere right around the center of his body, right around where the arc reactor is. So for this image to be in perspective, we would need to move the background up right about there, and doing so already makes it seem like it's more in perspective, but obviously the image doesn't work. So what can we do? Well, one of the things that I could do is maybe scale this image up, and then hopefully that helps a little bit. We'll see what happens here. And yeah, that kind of helps a little bit. I can also make Iron Man a little bit larger, so I'm gonna scale him up like so, and maybe bring him down. And that improves the image a tiny little bit in terms of perspective. What I think that we should do now is work with the background and maybe blur it a bit. So I'm gonna go into Filter, Blur Gallery, Tilt Shift. I think that the background has too much going on, so it might be a good idea to just blur it. So I'm gonna get these two solid lines close to each other, and I'm gonna drag them down here, and I'm gonna click and drag this dash line down so that everything above the dash line is completely blurry and everything below is a gradual transition into sharpness. And then I can adjust the blur. I don't want the background to be so blurry. I just want to remove some of the detail so that everything that is sharp is Iron Man and everything else is just a little blurry. And that looks pretty good. What I'll do now is work with Iron Man. He has a couple holes actually. If you double click to the side of the layer to bring up the layer style window and click on stroke, you'll notice a stroke that goes over his body, but then some strokes going inside of his body. That just means that we have some holes in the mask. So you have to be very careful when you're masking your layers not to leave holes. So this is a good way of finding that. Sometimes it helps if you select a color that's not in the composite, like green, and it makes it even more obvious. Totally up to you what you do. But in this case, I'm just gonna press cancel. And actually, before I do that, I just noticed that there's a little speck there too that I need to take care of. So what I'll do is I'll just press OK, and I'll zoom into this area to make sure that I remove whatever that is. So I'm just gonna paint with black, make my foreground color black, tap on the left bracket key on the keyboard to make my brush smaller, and I'll select the layer mask and I'll paint with black, like so. And I'll paint with white to fill these areas in. And if I don't see any green, it means I got all those pixels. I can now click the effects and drag it into the trash icon to remove it because I don't need it. Also, if you zoom in, you'll notice that the edges are very jagged. And to better see that, I'm gonna hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on the layer mask thumbnail to reveal the layer mask, and you can see how jagged the edges are. So why don't we smooth them just to make a better selection? I'm going to click on the Selected Mask button and drag the smooth slider to the right, and that gives us a smoother edge. And then I can drag the contrast slider to the right to give us a sharper edge. And I can press OK. I'll hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac again, and click on the layer mask thumbnail to reveal the original image. And I'm seeing a tiny little bit of fringing, this halo here, and maybe a little bit on this side as well. So we can actually remove that fairly quickly by going into Filter, Other, Minimum. This filter contracts a mask based by a number of pixels. You can click and drag and see how that just minimizes the mask, or contracts the mask rather. In this case, I don't need to go that far, maybe 2 pixels will work, and that brings the mask in and we get rid of a lot of those edge pixels. I'll press OK, double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen. And what I would recommend now is just to go through the entire image and see where you're missing areas. Like here, we need to select that better. So I can just select the polygonal lasso tool and just make a selection like so and fill that with black. I'll make my foreground color black, make sure that my layer mask is selected, and press Alt and Backspace, Option Delete on the Mac to fill with black to remove that. And you can go through the entire image and fix details like that. I'm not going to take the time on this video, but definitely do that in your projects. Also, you'll notice how this area here needs to be selected, but it's not. So in some cases you need to hide, in other cases you need to show. So see that? See how that whole piece is missing? So I can fill with white. White is my background color, so I can press Control Backspace, Command Delete on the Mac to fill with the background color, and now I get that edge back. So just take the time to go through the entire image to make sure that you didn't miss anything. I'm going to enable the curves adjustment layer. I don't necessarily mind the contrast layer that you have there, so I'll keep it. And then we'll work with these layers that are just applying a color to Iron Man. And you can probably do all of it with the Selective Color Adjustment Layer. Let me click on the reset button and see if we can match that. And what I'll do first is I'll create a black and white adjustment layer above everything else. That way we can only see the brightness of the image, and we'll work with that first. Come back into the Selective Color Adjustment Layer, and from here we can add or subtract colors to these colors. And I know that that sounds weird, but let me show you how it works. I'm going to select the neutrals, and if I drag the black slider, I can just make the neutrals darker or brighter. See that? Let me select the whites. I think it'll be more obvious with that. And I just realized that the reason that it's not obvious is because Patrick had this layer set to color, so I'll set it to normal. So let me try that again. See that? There we go. Now we're making the whites black. See that? See how I'm making the whites black? So that's how this adjustment layer works. So let's start with the whites. How dark do we want the whites? I think the whites are fine, just a little bit darker than white. And then we can move on to the neutrals, and I can just adjust this layer. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that the black and white image looks good, because if we can get the black and white image to look good, then the color composite will look good as well. So I'm just adjusting the colors to try to get a realistic black and white image. And I think this looks pretty good. We may need to fine tune it later, but this is before and this is after. So when we bring the color back, you can see that the image looks much, much better. And now we can work with the color. So I can go into the neutrals again and just add a little bit of cyan. And by the way this works is if you have a color and drag to the right, you'll add the color of that slider, in this case cyan. If you go the other way, you add the opposite color, in this case red. The opposite of magenta is green, and the opposite of yellow is blue. So I'm going to add a little bit of cyan and reduce the yellow to get a little tiny bit of blue. And I'll do the same thing for the blacks, add a little bit of cyan and reduce the yellows to add a little bit of blue. And then I can go into the reds, and that will control the red on his suit. So if I drag cyan all the way to the left, it makes the reds pop. Going the other way, it makes them duller. So I can drag the cyan slider to the right to add cyan and make it seem as if Iron Man is in a night scene. I can also go into the yellows and then maybe add yellow to make the yellows pop, or go to the left to completely desaturate those yellows. In this case, I think I might want to make those yellows pop a little bit and fine tune this accordingly. So maybe something like that. Before and after. I don't think we need this levels adjustment layer in this case, so I'm just going to delete it. I may add it later, we'll see. But for now, I think that we can do it all with this single adjustment layer. So what I recommend that you do at this point is create a new layer, clip it to a layer below, Control-Alt-G, Command-Option-G on the Mac, and then hold Shift and Backspace, Shift Delete on the Mac, and make it 50% gray on this dropdown and press OK. Change the blending mode to overlay, and then you can use the dodge tool to make areas of your composite darker, and I'm making the brush larger by tapping on the right bracket key on the keyboard, and then just making this darker like so. So you can selectively make areas of your composite darker just to change the lighting of the scene. And you can use the dodge tool to make areas brighter. So maybe we'll make this side brighter like so. And I know I may be a little heavy-handed there, but that's okay. I can always come back and change it. This is a non-destructive effect. So before and after, see how we completely change the lighting in the scene and it just makes it feel like he's there. And In your composite, you also had a rim layer, which no longer works because I enlarged Iron Man, but that's okay. I can actually zoom in and see what that looks like. And also by the layer name, I can tell how you created it. You used an inner stroke for that. So why don't I do that? And the cool thing that you did actually, just to point it out, it's really cool how you blur the edge there. That's really, really cool. So I could tell you put in some work into that. So I'll delete that and try to replicate it. So what I'll do is I'll double click to the side of the layer to bring up this window, the layer style window, and I can go into the stroke menu. And what I'll do is I'll make sure that my stroke is set to white and then adjust it accordingly. So maybe in this case, set it to about 4 pixels. Make sure the position is inside and I'll press OK. Then I can right click on the FX icon and select Create Layer. I'll press OK, and now I have a new layer that is based off that stroke. And this is a pixel layer. So I could zoom in and I can blur it. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And that blurs, see how I'm blurring that edge and it starts looking more like a rim light? So I'm fairly certain that that's what you did there, Patrick. I'll press OK. And what I'll do now is I'll hold Control on Windows, Command on the Mac, and click on the layer mask thumbnail to create a selection around Iron Man. And I can add a layer mask there and apply it. And now I have a stroke just like Patrick had before. See that? There's my stroke. Super cool. So what I'll do now is just make sure that all my layers are clipped to Iron Man so that everything looks the way that it should. I'll zoom out, and this is more or less where the rim light was before, right? And what I think that you should do is not have it inside or however it was, but instead separate it from everything like that, just not even clipped, and add a new solid color fill layer, bring it below there, and then clip that to the solid color fill layer. And this is what we have. We have that rim light and the black and white adjustment layer. And the reason that you're doing that is so that you can have your highlights, your midtones, and your shadows, and we can colorize those. So what I can now do is go into the color balance adjustment layer, clip it to the layer below, and watch what happens when I select the midtones here. I can bring cyan into those midtones and then blue, and it creates that super cool highlight. I can go into the shadows and, do the same thing. Maybe even add some purple or cyan and blue. Totally up to you. You're creating these really, really cool highlights. And I'll go into the highlights and adjust them accordingly like that. So that's what you're creating. And you can apply this to Iron Man by going into this black layer and changing the blending mode to screen. And I'll put all of these layers into one group. So with the layer below, I'll hold Shift, click on the layer on top here, and then press Control G on Windows, Command G on the Mac, and I'll call this Rim Light. And I can come in here now and then just hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on the layer mask thumbnail to make that into a black layer mask, which hides everything. And you can now selectively paint in the rim light into your Iron Man. So you can just select where you want that rim light effect to appear. So I think that this is a much better way of doing it than how you had it on there before. I think it works great. Like so. And obviously I'm going fairly quickly here, so you decide how the rim light is going to affect your image. But this is one way of doing it. And it looks like I have this dodge and burn layer outside of the clipping mask group. So I'll rename it and then move it down. Dodge and burn. And I'll just drag it back down right here. Control Alt G, Command Option G on the Mac, and there it is. So now I have my rim layer here, and that looks pretty cool. What I think we can do now is just create a new layer that has everything in this layer merge onto the layer below. So Control Alt Shift E, Command Option Shift E on the Mac, and that gives us a layer with everything below. And I can convert that into a smart object and go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and from here I can just fine tune the image. I know that I'm going to want a vignette here. I think it's going to make Iron Man really stand out, so I'll add that first and then I can adjust accordingly. Then from the basic panel I can add contrast, adjust the highlights just to make some areas pop a bit better, maybe adjust the shadows to hide the background a little bit. Totally up to you. Maybe give it a little bit of texture and clarity, which is contrast in the midtones. Add a little bit of vibrance, which brings out desaturated pixels. Vibrance protects saturated pixels and skin tones. And if you need to, always go into the color mixer. And from here, you can select these colors. I have the color mode selected and then adjust the saturation of each individual color. So maybe bring down the saturation of the yellows if it's too strong. Go into the reds and do the same thing. And you can adjust the hue to adjust those colors accordingly. And you can press OK when you're done. So this is basically what I would do using the images and the idea that you had. But to be frank with you, I probably would take it a step further. And what I would do is actually go into the background image here and I would replace the sky. So let me show you how to do that. I have this sky layer here and I can click and drag it into that layer and scale it up accordingly. And I want the bright light right about here. And what I'll do is I'll click and drag this layer below the background layer. And I'll double click to the side of the layer and use this blend if technique to remove the sky. So if I go into the blue channel, I can click and drag this to the left, the white point, hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click to split these in half and create a smoother transition between visible and invisible pixels. I want actual transparency. Actually, I want a layer mask. That's what I want, not even actual transparency. I want a layer mask. So let me show you a cool trick to get a layer mask out of blend if. I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'll click and drag it into the new layer icon. I'll disable the layer below, and the layer on top, I'll convert it into a smart object. Notice the layer thumbnail that has actual transparency now. So when I hold Control on Windows, Command on the Mac, and click on that layer thumbnail, it loads the visible pixels as a selection. I can now delete this layer by dragging it into the trash icon and click on the layer mask icon to create a layer mask on the original background. And I can remove the layer style by right-clicking on that icon and selecting Clear Layer Style. And what I could do now is simply make sure that I have a good mask. When you have a layer mask active, you can press the backslash key to see a red overlay, and anything that is red is not selected. So it looks like I need to paint with white on these areas here so that I can select those windows like so. And I'm just gonna paint with white on all these areas that should be visible. And obviously you're gonna need to spend a lot more time on the needle here. I don't wanna take too much time, so I'm just gonna do a very, very rough job here, but I think it'll still look pretty decent, especially considering the amount of time that we're gonna spend on here. This tutorial is already about 20 minutes now so far, so we need to keep it a little shorter. So there we go. And I'm going to now just make a quick selection out of these areas like so. Again, I'm going quickly here, spend a lot more time in your composite, and I'm using the space bar to pan as I make that selection. So as I'm selecting, I'm pressing the space bar. Cool. So it's not the best in the world, but I think this will work, and I can now select that layer mask and fill with white, Alt and backspace, Option backspace on the Mac. And I can double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen, and I can press the backslash key once again to remove that overlay. And I can come into this layer number 1, I'll call it sky. So we always want to name our layers. And I'll go into the hue and saturation adjustment layer, and I'll just adjust it so that it looks more like the original sky we had on there. Try to match that color as best as possible. And one way of figuring that out is by zooming in and just looking at the edge pixels here. And if we can get those edge pixels to disappear, then that means that the color matches. And you're not going to get them to disappear 100%, but you can fine tune it accordingly and they'll become almost invisible, and that's more or less what you want. That looks pretty good. I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen. You can see the before and the after. And I'm not going to close this. I'm just going to press Control S, Command S on the Mac to save. I'll go into the image that I'm working on, and this is what that looks like. Notice that the smart object applied all those filters we applied earlier, and the Iron Man looks much, much better. So I think that a sky replacement really helped this image. What we need to do now is apply this image to this final composite, and I'll call this layer Final. And what I need to do is simply press Control A on Windows, Command A on the Mac to make a selection around my entire canvas. Go into Edit, Copy Merge, and double click on the smart object to open it up in a new tab, and you can see that layer there. Control V on Windows, Command V on the Mac to paste, and you can see the before and the after. It looks like we have some issues here. I'm not sure where the black came through, but that's okay. We'll just do a quick hack here. So I'll just create a layer mask on there, and then I'll paint with black on these areas to hide those black pixels. Again, I'm not sure where they came from, but I'm glad I caught them, and I can just merge this into one layer. Press Control S on Windows, Command S on the Mac to save, close it, and then my composite is updated, and this is our final result. To compare, this is the original image submitted by Patrick, and this is the image that we completed together, and to be frank with you, I spent just a few more minutes fine-tuning the details, and this was the final result. And that's it for the very first PTC Edits Your Photos. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned a lot. Patrick, thank you so much for submitting your photo. It's awesome, and it just needed a little bit of work. If this is your first time at the Photoshop training channel, then don't forget to click on that subscribe and notification buttons. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys again in the next Photoshop tutorial.